This summer, the American flag was raised at the US Embassy in Havana for the first time since January 1961. John Kerry thanked Switzerland for representing US interests in Cuba for so many years.
To our Swiss colleagues, who would serve diligently and honorably as our protecting power for more than 50 years.
In 1959, Washington recognized the post-revolutionary Cuban government, but relations soon broke down, and the US president cut off ties with Fidel Castro's communist regime. The Americans left Cuba. In 1961, neutral Switzerland was asked to represent US interests in Havana. Emil Stadelhofer was the Swiss ambassador when the Soviets secretly stationed ballistic missiles on the island. John F. Kennedy went on television describing the secret Soviet build-up, proclaiming a blockade of Cuba and demanding that the Soviets remove the missiles.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
The crisis worsened when a Soviet anti-aircraft missile in Cuba shot down a US U-2 plane, killing the pilot. Kennedy correctly guessed that the Soviet leader had not authorized the downing and feared that retaliatory airstrikes would result in all-out war. Swiss ambassador Emil Stadelhofer was called upon to help prevent any further escalation of the crisis.
In
the documents we published, it can be clearly seen that the Americans sometimes wanted Switzerland to go further than was officially allowed, when it suited their interests. So sometimes Stadelhofer was called upon to resolve certain issues.
Stadelhofer certainly didn't end the Cuban crisis, but he was increasingly taken into the confidence of Castro, which involved certain risks. In Peter Kornbluh's book about the secret channels between the US and Cuba, he describes how Stadelhofer repeatedly found himself between the two fronts.
At one point, Castro decided he would seize the US Embassy building and turn it into the Ministry of Fishing. This was his way to stick it to the United States. Stadelhofer literally stood, apparently, on the front steps of the embassy building and told the Cuban military officials who had come to seize the embassy that this was diplomatic property and that Fidel Castro should think twice. There are very few people, I think, in the world that can say, I basically said to Fidel Castro he should think twice.
Stadelhofer met Castro at night in restaurants. It was unusual for a neutral Swiss to have the ear of a revolutionary leader. Swiss photographer Luc Chesser was present at some of these meetings.
Stadelhofer always said, "I agree with everything apart from the R in revolution. I'm in favor of evolution. I like revolution without the R." Both of them laughed about that.
Stadelhofer's relationship with Castro helped end the deadly 1965 boat lift, in which some Cubans fleeing to the US died when boats that weren't seaworthy sank. The ambassador managed to negotiate a US airlift from Varadero Military Airport to Miami. The flights continued for the next 7 years, helping more than 260,000 Cubans to migrate safely to the US. Stadelhofer was a Swiss diplomat who showed great courage in troubled times. And a father who barely knew his daughter. He died in 1977 when she was only 6. But for her, his memory lives on.
Und etwas, was nicht bekannt ist in der Öffentlichkeit,
something the public doesn't know concerns the funeral of my grandmother in Schaffhausen. The Cuban ambassador in Bern was told to attend the funeral to represent Fidel Castro. My father is said to have been very surprised, but also deeply touched.